Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Pass the Mic. I am Jemar Tisby and I am filling in for the one and only Tyler Burns. But don't worry, you don't have to deal just with me. We've got an incredible partner joining me on the mic, Ally Henny. What's up?
Hey everyone, I'm glad to be here. I feel like that there's a hole though in the
Of course, yes.
Tyler Burns, Burns Clan, follow at your own
There you
risk.
go. There you go.
Here. I feel like we just still needed that follow at your. We needed that flow a little bit. It
Very
feels a
much
little bit
so.
empty without.
Very
without
much
Tyler
so.
in this
He's a
episode.
cornerstone of the show.
Yes,
and he
is,
always
absolutely.
cues you up to tell us the title of your forthcoming book.
Oh yeah, see, we don't have it here, but thank you, Jemar. That was a great setup. So my forthcoming book is called "I Won't Shut Up: Finding Your Voice When the World Tries to Silence You," and it releases on June 20th, 2023. Yeah, so just
Go get your freedom book, Juneteenth.
freedom book. Oh my goodness, that's like very high stakes.
Very much. Well, it deserves it. Are pre-orders available?
Yes, pre-orders are available pretty much from wherever books are sold. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, like that. Maybe not Target yet, but I think some of those pretty like staple places that you would get books from, you could probably order it from.
That's awesome. And what I love about your book is that it talks about not only your past, but sort of the broader context of African-American experiences in the country. And books like that are so needed because of bull mess that's going on in places like Florida, where Governor Ron DeSantis rejected the pilot framework for advanced placement, or AP, African American Studies. You remember hearing about this?
Yes, I remember hearing about this. So first of all, why? I wish that Tyler was here so I could ask him why it's always Florida. Why is it always Florida,
What's up
y'all?
with your state,
It's
homie?
always Florida and Texas. But I can't talk too bad about Florida because Missouri. I'm from Missouri. I live in Chicago now. That's a disclaimer. But I'm from Missouri, and Missouri is getting up there. But it feels like if something is going to go down, especially if it's something like just off the wall or racist, it's going to be Florida. And Florida did not disappoint this time because, yes, as you said, the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, was trying to ban the teaching of African American studies.
Said it lacks educational value.
And now, see, I ain't heard all that. He said it lacks educational value?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Oh, my goodness.
These political officials, elected officials in Florida, led by Ron DeSantis, probably a presidential hopeful, are leading the way and showing their tales about what they really think about Black folk. And so in this instance, the advanced placement course, for the first time ever, is going to offer an AP course in African American Studies. Now, the way they do it is they pilot the program. So I think it was 60 high schools across the US. They said, implement this, give us feedback, we'll make tweaks before we do the official release. And so schools in Florida were part of this, and that's what DeSantis and his crew were responding to under the guise of the Stop Woke Act. You remember that? So this is basically a law in Florida supported by DeSantis that essentially, characterizes everything as critical race theory and then bans it. So it's a way of gatekeeping in schools in Florida. And so he said, this violates the Stop Woke Act. In particular, had issues with Black queer studies and some of the other racial justice issues.
Black feminism, was one of the things
yes.
that says womenism. That whole bag was also excluded too. It's really interesting to me. First of all, there's so many, and we're going to dissect this more later. But just something that Jemar brought out that I need to say right now: this whole Stop Woke Act, this whole woke
Come on,
thing.
speak on it.
Woke has just become another code word for Black. So remember back in 2013, 2014, 2015, how the word thug became a code word for Black people? Well, now it's woke. And it's interesting to me how stopping woke essentially means stopping the teaching of African American studies, and slightly by extension also Black history, even though there's some differences in those fields. But it's just very interesting.
Tyler and I have talked about this and the value or utility of the word woke, because it's been, like so many other things, co-opted and then weaponized, and then, like you're saying, it's a stand-in for Black in a lot of cases. So it was under that law, that act, that they said these standards violated. And then what was so interesting is AP, which is governed by the College Board, a nonprofit that puts these tests together, came back with a, shall I say, whitewashed version of AP African American Studies. And there were some conspicuous names missing and movements and ideas missing. But before I get into that, we need to talk about the difference between African American Studies and African American history.
Yes, please educate us on this, because I took an African American Studies course whenever I was in college. And I know that it covered, I mean, there were historical elements to it. In fact, that was the first place that I learned, had ever even heard about the Tulsa riot, the Tulsa massacre. That was the very first place that I had even heard of that. But we also talked about Black culture. So we watched Chappelle's Show. We watched a few episodes of Chappelle's Show, because that was the time whenever I was in college, is whenever that was on. I think we watched the movie Higher Learning was one of the things that we did.
They went hard in that course.
Yeah, so then we also did, we watched Eyes on the Prize, part of Eyes on the Prize. That was where I had learned about the race massacre. But yeah, Dr. Johnny Washington at Missouri State University, he taught that course. But something that I didn't realize fully was that Black history, your discipline of history, there's overlap with African American studies, but I think that I had just sort of taken for granted that these are actually two different disciplines, because there's so much because African American studies includes so much within it.
Exactly. And if you look at the early days when we were first hearing about this rejection of the AP standards, when you looked online, people were using them interchangeably, African American Studies, African American History, but they're actually two separate fields. So the main difference is African American Studies is an interdisciplinary, integrative field. And so it'll incorporate elements of sociology and psychology and contemporary pop culture, things like you're mentioning. It definitely has really a base and a foundation in Black history to help inform it. But you're going to expand to a lot of different fields. It includes literature and other fields. And you're also going to get much more contemporary. African American Studies can go right on up to the present day. Black history, or African American history, is a specific field within the broader discipline of historical studies, which the primary goal is to study change and continuity over time. And the primary tools for that are primary sources, historical sources. Generally, you're not going to, in the field or the discipline of history, get right on up to the present day. I mean, they're usually a chapter or something. But these are two separate, and African American Studies as a field is a bit more recent than African American history as a field, as you have more and more Black scholars coming up in more and more different fields and putting their work together in new and creative ways. And so for that reason, it's really helpful, I think, for people, because you get exposure to a lot of Black thought leaders, as well as the historical events.
So what are the implications then of eliminating an African American Studies course? Or I guess it's not really eliminating it, but effectively they kind of are. They're scaling it back. They seem to be taking away even some of the things that we would consider, that I would consider. So for instance, they're removing bell hooks was one of the feminist authors that was removed from the conversation. I also believe that Coates was removed from the list too. I saw that in an article, and I also think that interestingly enough too, Alice Walker was removed. And so for those of you who don't know who Alice Walker is, Alice Walker actually coined the term womanist, actually coined that term. She's the author of probably her most well-known work is The Color Purple.
Yeah.
And then she also, even within the Color Purple, but in her work just broadly, explores queer themes, specifically lesbian themes and stuff in her work. And so her work has been seminal to the Black feminist movement, to the womanist movement, to queer studies. So she has such a, and then the broader discipline of African American studies. So this woman's work touches multiple disciplines, and in some ways is very critical to our understanding. And yet she's been eliminated.
Exactly. And you mentioned Coates, but a lot of the folks that were eliminated. So what happened was Florida levels this objection, AP and the College Board revise it. In the revision, we're finding out all of these elements that they excluded now, which is so interesting because College Board is saying this has nothing to do with political, posturing or response to whatever. But it just so happens that pretty much everything they objected to is what they pulled out.
It has some sort of political element to it.
Yeah, and if it's not pulled out, all right, it's optional, right? So it might be listed, but it's no longer a required part.
Okay.
And it was interesting because I recall reading that some of the movements, like conversations about reparations, Black Lives Matter, that now was sort of considered peripheral or optional. So all of this falls away, and we're losing so much with this. And it's the other. Does it seem like they have something out for Black women? I mean,
it's giving misogynoir. It's giving misogynoir.
Right.
So I actually have a question about that, Jemar, because you mentioned that, I know, like, you're the host here, but I just have a question because you're the expert here. What are the implications of not talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, or not talking about just you named a couple of other different things that, to me, if we're going to study at least contemporary African American culture, if we're going to study at least some of the contemporary things that are happening, I mean the moments that are not just African American studies. I mean, you talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, you talk about the George Floyd protests, you talk about those types of things. Those are actually elements of Black history,
very relevant,
that are being. What are the implications? Why would they do that? What are the implications of that?
So I've said on here before what it's like as a Black person in predominantly white spaces to be valued for our presence, but not for our perspectives. So this is the game they're playing. One of the things I say is that racism adapts, never goes away, it adapts. So the way it's adapted recently is folks on the far right, reactionaries, the people who would reject something like the AP African American Studies course, what they're okay with is token Black presence. Right? So it's not that you're going to see people completely excluding Black folks altogether. They'll just have a particular kind of Black folk who shares their perspective, even if it's a minority among the broader Black populace. This is how we get a Herschel Walker, right? This is how we get, in the picture at the conservative, rally event, there's always that sprinkling of Black faces in there. And what I think that gets at is, we don't mind y'all being here anymore. I mean, sort of, kind of, but we'll let you be here for the photo op. But don't actually try to change the picture.
Oh, wow.
Don't actually try to that's what African American studies and Black history do, is they are by their nature subversive in the sense of overturning the standard narrative, which is white-centered. And because it does that, there's actually nothing about AP African American studies, if taken for its weight and its gravity, that Ron DeSantis would be happy with, right? Like because of the inherent nature of the study brings voices that have been pushed off to the side to the center, and then you get a different perspective. So that's, what do you think is the harm? What's being taken from us more than blocking a particular elements on a advanced placement test?
So first of all, I gotta say that I'm kind of mad about this whole thing.
Yes.
And the thing that's making me mad about it, first of all, is that this African American Studies course, it's an advanced placement course. It's not even, I doubt that if you're even part of an advanced placement program that you even have to take the class. And so I'm mad on several levels. Like, first of all, like, I'm mad because nobody is forcing anybody to take these courses. Nobody's forcing anyone to do it. Like, the whole thing is optional. So why are they even making such a stink about it in the first place? So that's the first thing that's making me mad. The second thing that's making me mad is that we even have to have an African American Studies course in the first place. Now, don't get me wrong. African American Studies, to me, in my humble opinion here, that should be a deeper dive on the African American Studies that are all, it's a social studies class, people. This is social studies. We've all taken social studies courses in middle school, high school, even at the college level. This is social studies. So by rolling some of this back, it's weakening the African American Studies course, but also this is harming the field of social studies. This is harming kids learning about social issues that are relevant to them in society. So if we can't even get Alice Walker in a direct African American Studies course,
when you gonna get it?
Where are you going to get things that are basic things? And the implications of that for me are then, because everybody takes social studies, Black history is everybody's history. African American Studies is our specific cultural perspective. But if you're going to be like a good, just kind of informed person in the world, it helps to know something of other people groups, because we could expand this out to AAPI people. We could expand this out to people from with an indigenous background. We could expand this out with various other intersections of race, of identity, those types of things. And so basically, it's a form of erasure that kind of is telling us, well, you don't really exist, and the things that you would want to learn about yourself.
Yes.
Too bad. We're gonna withhold it. The state, the government, the whomever is going to withhold it. Then the next thing that makes me mad about that is, I'm from a rural kid. I actually didn't have access to AP courses. I think my high school got AP courses several years after I left, but I didn't have AP courses. I didn't have IB courses. We did have dual enrollment. There were a couple of community colleges and universities that were near my school that I did get to. I actually went into college with some dual enrollment credit.
Oh, nice.
But I did not have really anything aside from like the Black History Month type thing. It wasn't until I was a sophomore in college that I had my first African American Studies course.
Yep.
And in a way, that for me, being somebody from a rural context that was predominantly white, I was learning about myself.
Yes.
Because I never had those, I didn't have that. In fact, I referenced Dr. Washington earlier. He was the first Black teacher that I'd ever had, period.
Yep.
I was a sophomore in college. He was the first Black teacher that I ever had in a classroom. So here I was, like, 20 years old. And that was the first time. So I've been through, 14 years of schooling at that point. And so I feel like that we are robbing not just the white kids of learning and knowing how to interact and knowing the cultural things. Because how many times do we hear white people, well, I didn't know that. Well, golly gee willikers, I didn't realize that Black people went through so much. Well, you would know it if you had an African American history class or you had an African American studies class. You would know it.
That's right.
Or we hear like, oh, well, golly, I didn't realize that racism was still a problem. Again, that African American studies would tell you this is like African American studies would tell you that. But then so yes, it's terrible for them. But I can't help but think about those Black kids.
Yes.
That are in, and not that we should be learning about ourselves from our school, and not that we should be learning about ourselves, but and I think that you have a whole tirade about this, about how Black people need to know our history. We need to know our culture. It's something that we actually need to study.
Yes.
And so I feel bad for all the Black kids that are being deprived of learning about themselves in a holistic way that's not whitewashed, that's not, I just have a problem with the fact that it's even what we are learning about ourselves even has to be dictated by people who don't have our best interests at heart.
We need to give the people a chance to marinate on that for a second. We'll be right back after this quick promo break.
Hey everybody, thank you for listening to this episode of Pass the Mic, and we want to tell you a little bit about how you can support not just liking, subscribing, reviewing, but also our Patreon audience as well.
Absolutely. We are a listener-supported podcast, so thank you so much to our current patrons, and we want to invite you and give you the opportunity, if you're not already a patron, to go ahead and go to patreon.com/passthemic. You can pay as little as $1 an episode, and your support helps make this podcast possible.
Vocoders, $1. Support us. Patreon.com/passthemic.
So you were talking about what makes you upset. There's one other thing that makes me upset around this AP African American Studies is the timing that it was right after MLK Day. It's right before Black History Month. It's the particular season in the year when we're actually taking time as a nation to focus a little bit more on Black people. And to your point about, well, how does this, if I'm a Black high schooler in Florida in this case, but it could be any number of states. Sarah Huckabee Sanders has her first act on her first day as governor, signed this anti-CRT executive order, right? So it's happening in multiple places. We just have a particularly prominent case in this state. And to your point, how does that, Black high school teenager feel when they see that this particular course offered for the first time is now under attack, is now under criticism? And by the way, the other thing that upsets me is this was still the pilot period of the framework.
Oh my goodness.
It was literally in the stage where they're meant to collect feedback, and there's there's a vehicle set up to do that in an organized way. So I don't know who broke the story, but it just seems to me like if you had a legitimate criticism, you actually could have voiced that, and it would have been appropriate to do that through the established channels and not on live TV or through a press conference, right? Like it's a deliberate salvo in the culture wars to make it this publicized, right? And however it started, he blew wind on the fire to just sort of stoke this. And here's the other thing that really upsets me. This is about conservatives asserting their non-liberal bona fides. So, and I say it that way on purpose because I recently heard a commentator state that modern conservatism is not so much about being conservative as it is about appearing not liberal. So it's a way for these political officials to say, I'm not liberal. Here are my credentials. I'm blocking this content. Which, by the way, I always had the impression, like these are not careful, detail-oriented people in my experience. So I have always had the impression when I first heard about this that somebody got the frameworks and then they did like a word search for certain trigger words, right? Like they literally have these lists of, if you hear these words, it's critical race theory. And it'll be things like intersectionality, which is so frustrating because it simply means that we're not one singular identity. Right. We live at the intersection of multiple identities, right? Which is not controversial. It shouldn't be. Anyway, so so it's very frustrating. And then it puts us in the awkward place of sort of sounding like we're defending the AP system as a whole.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, tell it.
I mean, like you said, it wasn't even available where you are. And there are criticisms about the AP test in general as a way to earn college credit. You know, where is it offered? Where isn't it offered? All of that tends to fall along class and racial lines. And then, of course, packing so much meaning into a single test that you take on a single day rather than, you know, a larger body of work. And then the College Board, you know, I believe it's a nonprofit, but there's definitely financial considerations that go into this. I mean, are you like doing backflips over AP? Like you just got to have it?
You know, the thing that I missed out on with not having AP was simply not having the college credit. So there were people that, you know, we came in that we were in the same freshman class, that they were coming in as like sophomores, or they were coming in as juniors. So then that allowed them to be able to expand, to be able to take more high level classes, et cetera, et cetera. And so whenever we start talking about the access to AP and even being able to get into those courses, because from what I had understood, like you have to have a certain types of grades, certain type of whatever. So there's a lot of implications there for Black and brown students who might not even have access even to the course. I didn't have access because I was in a rural context. So there's so many intersections. Trigger words there, but there's so many intersections of race and class there that whenever people don't have access to those courses, then they don't have access to, because the school isn't teaching African American studies. There's probably not like a general African American studies course. It is put into the AP system, so only a certain caliber of student even has access to that course, and that caliber of student, quote unquote, those tend to largely be white, tend to largely be affluent. And so then it's almost like you are gatekeeping African American studies from some of the people who need it the most. And I find that extremely problematic. And so I think that it's good that we challenge even the premise of, well, you know, do we really want to defend this system that has so many disadvantages for people? There's so many disadvantages. I mean, we could label. We talked about race. We talked about class. We could talk about ability. Students that are disabled. There are just so many ways in which the system itself. I don't think that we are here apologizing for the system itself, but we're saying we need African American studies. We need Black history.
Yeah, and the fact that it's the first time this is offered, like this has not been done before, that we focused so intently on African Americans and our story in this nation, I think that's highly important. I think what's also highly important is the subtext here is we're silencing Black scholarship. We're silencing Black insights in general. Because one of the things that stuck out to me in an article I read was there were over 300 experts, scholars consulted, most of whom were Black, many of whom were from HBCUs.
Oh my goodness.
Right, so it's like, these are the people on the ground doing the work, being pioneers in the field. These are not just, you know, person on the street, tell us your opinion. These are informed people who've really dedicated their lives to study. And it's within the broad scope of ideas, right? Like this is a course that's designed to give you college credit. College is all about sort of exploring different ideas, learning how to evaluate and analyze, which is why I take such umbrage with this word that they've weaponized, indoctrination. So what they're doing is making anything Black political and anything that has been traditionally accepted or promulgated in the white community as apolitical or non-political, as quote unquote objective.
Yes, it's the standard.
We have a whole conversation on that one.
It's the standard. It's the metric by which all of the things are judged. And to me, just as you were saying this, to me, what it was sounding like, whenever you're talking about the scholars from the HBCUs, the work that the different noted people have put into this course and educating the next generation, it really kind of gives off, well, you know, kill them before they grow. So this is a pilot. I need to emphasize that again, a pilot program. If you don't know what a pilot program is, it's not the final thing. We're gonna throw some things together. We're gonna put some ideas together. We're gonna see what sticks to the wall. We're gonna put it out here. Say this, teachers teach this, and then they get feedback from the teachers. This is what worked. This is what didn't work. They might even get feedback from the students to say this is what worked. This is what didn't work. This is where we have the most interest at, et cetera, et cetera. So they're doing all of this before the program so they're freaking out just at the very idea.
Yes.
It's not that this has been taught, any of this has actually been taught. It's the idea of teaching it. And so they're stripping it away, and it really feels like killing it before it grows.
It absolutely does. And it's also part of a bigger initiative on the part of the far right to really undermine public education.
Oh my goodness.
In general.
Talk about it.
Right?
Talk about it.
So we've seen this wave. You can look at news clips of these highly contentious school board meetings, people yelling at the top of their lungs over the same kinds of issues, what they're alleging is CRT, what they don't want their kids to be exposed to. They're literally now pulling books off library shelves, or in classrooms, you've got to go through and check everything according to like the Stop Woke Act or whatever standards in place in that area. And it's really part of a broader movement to try to either undermine public education and siphon resources off to private schools, vouchers, different things. School choice is what they call it, quote unquote. Or it's an attempt to take over the public school system and remake it in what I would call a white Christian nationalist image, honestly.
Well.
So we can't actually, there's a whole other episode, but to actually examine the white Christian nationalist underpinnings of this movement, which calls public schools, Caesar school, Rome, right? This pagan, horrible, evil thing that we're giving our children up to, and it must be redeemed or taken back for the kingdom of God, kind of. All of that's wrapped up in this. And I think ultimately what it serves to do is silence Black voices, abort our scholarship before it has the chance to actually change things in the world. And I think that's really the ultimate goal of be seen to a minimal degree, be heard as long as you can parrot our talking points. Otherwise, you essentially need to disappear.
Well, ain't that the truth?
So, I guess that leaves it. We still got to fight the battles in the public policy sphere, but I think that we also have to get creative about making sure that we're educating our communities, our children, in what they need to be. Do you have any thoughts around like how you want to make sure that your kids or your community is getting the information it needs about Black folks?
So first of all, I mean, every day at my house is African American studies. I'm being facetious, whatever I say that, but no, like as a parent, it concerns me. My kids go to a predominantly Black school in Chicago. Their school's like 98, 99% Black or something like that. And I'm very thankful to the teachers there that they integrate Black studies into what they do. Like one day my preschooler just randomly popped off about something about Barack Obama, and I was like,
What?
Okay. Girl, do you even know who Barack Obama is? Like she just randomly said something about Barack Obama. She was in preschool at the time. She's in kindergarten now. But I was like, I didn't even know you knew who Barack Obama is. But I also know that my kids are going to be entering into the high school system before I know it, and they probably won't be at a predominantly Black high school, and that is going to affect their lives and what they learn as they go on to college. That's going to affect what they know. And I think that it really is on us as parents I think that we should teach as we're able to teach, but I want to give space for not every parent has a college degree.
Right.
Not every parent has taken an African American studies course.
That's right.
Not every parent has or is able to read as extensively as you and I have. And so that's why I think it's so important for us to have our kids, for Black people to have our children in Black spaces where they're imbibing the culture, where we talk about ourselves, where we define ourselves, where we're able to hear our own stories. But then beyond that, like, even if you have friends, if you have family members, your church, your religious organizations, your clubs that you're involved in, really making sure that your kids are in a space where they can learn some of these things that they might not learn at school, where they can hear the names of people, where they can put your kids in spaces where they can hear the name Alice Walker, where they can hear the name Bell Hooks, where they can hear about Howard Thurman and James Cone and Katie Cannon and Dolores Williams and Garrett Wilmore, and put them in places where they can hear those names, and where people, because we're African American, we're an oral culture. Everything doesn't have to be written down.
Yes.
But at least speaking those people's names, so they don't show up and they're like, you mention somebody and they're like, who's that person?
Right.
I have no idea.
I never knew. Yeah.
I never knew. And so I think that there is an onus on us to do that, because the system has proven once again that it won't do it for us.
That's right. Always good to talk to you. Always great wisdom and insight on there. We want to know what you think. Tag us on Twitter @_PassTheMic. Hit us up in the comments. What are you thinking about this whole AP African American Studies thing, and more broadly, hearing the voices and perspectives of Black people in our formal education system and also in the broader effort to educate our people? Let us know, and we'll see you next time on Pass the Mic.
Peace.